Hey everyone, and welcome back to Salesforce Mojo. Today we have a really cool video because we're actually going to combine two of my favorite worlds. So if you're familiar with the Marketing Cloud videos I used to create, I've now been focusing a lot on Commerce Cloud, and I really thought, what if we brought these two worlds colliding together here and show the power of the systems together? So today we're doing the order confirmation email with Marketing Cloud. So if you want to see a really cool use case of how to trigger out emails from Commerce Cloud into Marketing Cloud and really dive into the detail of how to make this work, we'll be covering this in two parts. Part one, we'll go over the overview here and the architecture, and we'll dig into the Commerce Cloud piece of this and how to actually configure this. And then in part two, we'll actually get into Marketing Cloud and configure the email, the journey, and all the pieces there to really make the whole magic happen. And then at the very end, pull that together into an entire use case. So stick around, we're going to be digging in right now. So before we actually dive into the hands-on here, or even going in a little bit further into the architecture, I wanted to start with the end goal. The end goal here is that we have a customer who can go and check out with any items in their inventory and be able to receive an order confirmation email with those products inside the email to show them what they purchased here. Now you can see an example on the screen here. So with that orientation in mind, let's kind of jump into the pieces that we're going to put together in our architecture. Piece one here is Commerce Cloud, which we've been doing a lot in this series about. We want to be able to capture an order creation, and we want to be able to fire an order confirmation email out of Commerce Cloud into Marketing Cloud. So those are the two key pillars here that we're going to need to configure. Then we have the Marketing Cloud piece. Now this is where all of the visual magic happens. This is where we have an email, and in this case we're going to use an email with guided template language. We're going to have a data extension that's going to store some information about the user, and then we're going to have a journey that actually is the one triggering and sending out this email. So now what does this actually look like in the specifics? Let's actually jump over to Lucidchart and we'll build this architecture here together. So I did a little bit of stubbing out here so you guys don't have to watch me draw boxes just to kind of put the pieces together. But we basically said at this point we have Commerce Cloud and we have Marketing Cloud. And now we need to get a little more into the specifics of how these two connect and what happens inside of each one of them. So we're going to start with a process that at this point an order is created. Now we've spent a lot of time on that process in checkout, and we've spent a little bit of time on setting up the multiple different checkout options we have. But we're basically capturing an order, and what we want to be able to do is trigger a flow that will actually communicate with Marketing Cloud. Now one of the things I love doing with some of the Salesforce capability is using platform events. So we're actually going to use the platform event called Order Summary Created platform event. And this platform event gets fired every single time an order is created using an order summary. So we'll just stick this on here. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a flow off of that platform event. So this is going to be our order confirmation flow platform event. So every time an order summary created platform events gets created, our flow will actually trigger. And inside of our flow, it's actually going to be pretty basic. We might do a little bit of error handling and checking to make sure the person who got triggered has an email address and other things of that nature. But once we've kind of gone through all of that boilerplate stuff, the main thing here is going to be an invocable. And if you're not familiar with invocable, invocables are basically Apex classes that allow you to do a little more intense computation within Flow, but still allow you to kind of take that into Flow and configure it and pass it different values. So we're going to call ours order confirmation callout, and we're basically going to trigger this from the Flow, and this callout here is basically going to be a API callout, just like it says. And we'll do the authentication here, and we'll do the actual callout. But what are we actually calling out to? Well, on the Marketing Cloud side, what we're going to have is we're going to have an order confirmation journey, and this journey is going to have an email associated with it, at least one, and we're also going to have a data extension that's automatically going to capture our data about who actually is coming into the journey. So what it'll look like at the end of the day is this order callout will go to Marketing Cloud, it will authenticate, get a token, and then it will pass values to an API event that is configured in the journey. And that will actually start the process of creating some data inside of the data extension, and then we'll enter the journey and they will actually get the email from there. So this is still a little high level here, but it gets a little more into the specifics of how the cogs here piece together to really make this engine work between Commerce Cloud and Marketing Cloud. So with that base, let's actually jump straight into the Commerce Cloud piece of this. All right, I've jumped us right into a brand new flow here inside of our Salesforce Mojo instance. And as I mentioned before, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to configure this as a platform event triggered flow. And once we've done that, we'll be able to choose our platform event, which the one we want is the order summary created event. And again, this will allow us to trigger this flow every time an order summary is created. I will note that this is not an updated event. This is only a created event. So if you want that, there actually is a different platform event that we could use to utilize that use case here, but we're going to use a created one for this case. So once we've done that, I think it would be nice if the first thing that we did in here was just a quick decision to make sure that the order we have has a person connected to it with an email address, which in most cases should exist, but it helps kind of make sure that there are no issues when we trigger this over into Marketing Cloud. So in this case, we're going to be doing this against our B2C site that we've already created. So we'll go into our records and we'll go down to order summary, and we're going to do this against the bill to contact, and then scroll down to email here. And what we're going to do is null, false. And the other outcome will be email does not exist. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and save this, and we'll call this order confirmation flow, and we'll save that. And that's really all we can do right now in flow. The next thing we need to do is actually go work on our invocable. And this will be what we can actually drop right into the flow here using Apex action. So let's hop over to our VS Code. All right, so here we are inside of our VS Code instance. And for the sake of time today, I've created everything beforehand, but we'll walk through every single step in the process here and kind of the whys behind it. Now, there are probably a million ways of doing this exact thing here, but I've decided to do this in two different classes. One called the SFMC service, which is basically the one interfacing and making the final API call out and getting the token and doing all the things it needs to make the call, because we need this to be an @future method. Now, on the other side of this, we have our order confirmation callout. And that order confirmation callout is the one that is actually the invocable that's in the flow. It's one gathering the information from there. It's also the one gathering the other information it needs. And then it actually is passing that information over into the SFMC service. So you can see that our first method here is called post message. And this has an input of the message JSON. And that basically is consuming that message JSON from the order confirmation callout. And it is calling the send request, which in this case is the send request, which is actually doing the actual API callout. Now you can see down here below that I've actually taken out some of the subparameters and some of the other parameters. Those X's are basically what you need to replace with your own things. So one of the things I'll be doing at the very end of this is putting this in the repo so you guys can have access to this. So you'll need to find your subdomain from your Marketing Cloud login instance, and you can replace that here. But it basically starts with saying, okay, I first need a token, and this token is going to be what authenticates us. Again, there's several ways of doing this. I've decided to do it inside of this Apex class, like I mentioned before, and it's calling this method called getToken, and it's building the auth body it needs to actually make this JSON callout as a post here. So you'll need your client ID, you'll need your client secret, you'll need your account ID, and it does need to be the client credential version of this. And then you're actually going to do the HTTP request, and you can see that our endpoint here is inside of a name credential. So let's hop over there and see what that looks like real quick. So you can see here that the name credential is pretty simple. And this name credentials, we're not handling authentication at all. We're really just using it as a method to keep the URL, which again, I could have done straight inside of the code, but I like pulling this out into this name credential as much as possible. And I probably should have done that in the below section as well. But again, a couple different ways we could do this. But now that we have that, we can come back over into our VS Code. We're making a post, and we're basically getting the body that we created up here. So we've taken this class here and we've serialized it so it's JSON, and we're passing that as the actual body of the request. And at the very end of this, we get the body back from the token. But you can see we're not actually extracting the access token at all yet. We're doing that back down here. So we've made this call out to get token, this method. And from there, we're using auth body, we're deserializing the JSON, and we're getting this access token here, which actually is going to be our authentication token. And if we keep on going down a little bit more, we have our endpoint we've configured here, which we could also make a name credential. But you can see that the important part here is that we have the bearer here with the token that we've pulled out of that previous call. So we're actually making 2 requests every time this is going out. And then we're passing it the body. And the body is, if we follow this all the way back up here to the original place we called this, is the message JSON. And that message JSON is basically what Marketing Cloud is expecting the body to look like. Now at this point, I thought it would be helpful if I actually pulled up this in Postman and showed you what this could look like. Now the first thing I'll mention is that there is a public Salesforce Marketing Cloud APIs Postman collection out there. I'd encourage you to go download that. We'll use this later on to make sure everything is working. And it just makes the whole process a lot easier. And you can see we're under the fire entry event REST call here. And this is exactly what we're trying to do in Apex. And you can see that the top post URL is the same we're trying to use, minus the ET_subdomain, which actually would be your subdomain. But you can see inside of this body here that we have this JSON payload. And this JSON payload has a couple of different attributes that are important for us to talk about. The first thing is we have our contact key here. This contact key is the key that will be used to create the subscriber and the contact once it's been entered. So that's important, and it must be unique or a person that already exists in there. And the second one is another really important thing here. This is the event definition key. This is actually the journey API key that will be needed in order to get this into the journey. And the last piece here, which actually makes the email and the magic happen, is the data. And this can be whatever you want, but essentially it needs to be what's inside of the data extension that you're firing into. So for our purposes today, we need the order summary ID, we need the subscriber key, we need the email, first name, last name, and then this thing called order payload with this JSON in it. You're probably wondering, like, what do I actually do with that and how would that be valuable in a data extension field? Well, we'll show you that here in a little bit. But kind of the short version of it is that we're able to extract that and really build the coolness in this email. But we do need some of the other pieces here to make sure that this only gets fired once for an order, which would be awkward if we got a couple of these order confirmation emails. So it's a surefire way to make sure we only get one if we make the order summary primary here. But then we're really building the rest of it around this call here. So now let's jump back over to VS Code and we'll actually show what the invocable looks like where we build this. Okay, so at this point, it's probably a good idea for you to go over to the Git repo and pull down my latest update over there, which will have this order confirmation call out in it. Because this is going to get a little bit intense if you're not familiar with Apex. Because we do have to create a couple of classes and use those classes to connect multiple classes together in order to actually make this work. But the first area here, and I'll go over the high level, is the send messages. And you can see we've put the disclaimer here that this is an invocable method. We've given it a label so it's easy to find, a little bit about the description, which is always nice and fun to have. But then the first thing that's happening is we're doing the send message. And we're taking all the requests in. And you can see that the incoming request is a list of journey requests. You might be wondering, okay, well, is there some special thing inside of Salesforce that's journey requests? No, this is actually just a class that we've declared down below. And this journey request are all the fields that we're accepting inside the invocable, which we'll show here in a moment. But you can see that this is an invocable variable, and in our case, we've decided that every single one of these is going to be true. And then we give it the name that we want. And this kind of gives the structure of what are we expecting when this invocable gets fired here. So we're taking these requests, we're iterating over these requests, and for every one of these requests, we're actually creating a journey entry. And if we scroll down just a little bit, this create journey entry is just another method, and it's accepting these requests in here, and we're going to start to build a payload. And this payload is actually the JSON that will pass over into Marketing Cloud. So first thing we do is declare that as a variable, and then we're going to use this create message method here, which will actually help us structure this correctly. But before we go down there, let's just run through the rest of this. We're creating this message, and we're expecting that the message is going to come back. And as long as it's not false, we're actually going to add it to this payload here. And then from there, as long as the payload has something in it, we're going to call our SFMC service.postMessage, and we're going to send it the JSON of all the class data that we've gathered so far. So this is where the two dots connect. You can see that if we jump back over here, this post message we just walked through is actually what gets called, and then it goes down kind of the rabbit hole of getting the token and sending the request out. But that's how the two classes connect together. Now, all that's fine and dandy, but we need to actually get our JSON from this message in order to actually post it and go into Marketing Cloud. So this create message is where some of the magic starts here. So we're going to scroll down a bit, and you can see that as we get the request here, what we're actually doing is we're going to build the payload. And we need to make sure first that we have the API key here. But if you recall from this Postman, and I'll pull this back up here, it's not as simple as just a single layer JSON. We have our couple of attributes up at the top here, contact key and event definition key, but we also have our data, which has everything in it. But that's a nested object inside of this overall JSON structure. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build the data portion of that. So that is this piece right here. We're going to build this first, and that's where this journey data payload class comes into play here. If we scroll down here, this is exactly what we're expecting. So if you wanted to add a middle name in here or add something else inside of here to help with some personalization, something else, you could just add a variable in here, and you need to make sure that it's also in your request body and you can get access to it. But we're basically just taking what's in the request, and a reminder the request is basically what the invocable is given inside of the flow. So the flow has given us the journey, it's given us the email, it's given us the order summary ID, it's given us the subscriber key, the first and last name, but it hasn't given us the actual items. So we have all this information directly from the flow, which is really nice because it can just pass it directly over. But we actually need the items. We want the price to show up, we want the quantity to show up, and the URL to show up. And that's where we've created yet another method called order summary payload. And if we scroll back up to our order summary payload, it's a method right above it. We're accepting the order summary ID we got from the flow as an input. And from there, we're actually making a query back into Salesforce. And you can see that it's not a super complicated query. We're just getting a couple of fields here. We're getting it from the order item summary, where the order summary ID is equal to it, and making sure that we don't get the shipping charge. We don't want to see that in the email. Everyone knows they're going to get charged for shipping. They don't need to know about that. Or they don't need to be reminded of it, I should say. Although you could add that if you really wanted to, but for this case, I've excluded that. And then from there, we're actually building the journey order item payload. And again, if we scroll down, that in of itself is its own class here. And we're just taking a couple of parameters like the item name, the quantity, the amount, the URL. So we're building yet another class here with some information, and we're adding it to the order summary items payload. And once we've done that, at the very end of this, we're adding it to a wrapper here so that it's structured correctly. And some of the hard parts about something like this is actually getting your Apex classes to match the overall structure, right? If you're missing this object structure here, it's not going to work. If it's not nested in the right way, it's not going to work. So again, it's just getting the structure down. So we're getting first the order item payload, we're adding it here, we're adding it to a wrapper class just to get it all structured correctly, and then we're serializing it and we're passing it back in here. So that basically is our JSON that we're passing through into the order payload here. And from here, then we're actually taking the top section. So we're doing this a little bit backwards from where the Postman is. We're starting with this section, and then after we've done that, we're then building this section and adding in everything inside of the data element here. So you can see we have a payload here, which has the contact key, has the event definition key, and it has the data key, which has the data payload that we just built above. So once we've done all of that, that's kind of the hard part there. We're basically passing it back, the entire payload, back to the create message up here, which will then go down into the SFMC service and post the message, and you're passing along all that great work we just did into the structure it's expecting and over into the FFMC service, which will eventually make the call out with that body of JSON we just created. So with all that having kind of been talked through, and again, if you need to go back and like listen to that again, I know I went through that pretty quickly, but you'll have an example. I just talked through kind of the key elements there. Let's save all that in the org, and let's actually go into our journey where we can bring that invocable in. All right, we're back in our flow here. So we're going to go over to the email exists side of this, and we're going to create a new action. And the easiest way to find any of your invocables is to go under Apex Actions here. And you can see that we have the add context to SFMC journey invocable there, which is the label that we provided it. Now at this point, you can give this any name you want. So I'm going to call it fire event in journey. But the bottom section here is all of the inputs, right? So I'm going to toggle back to our code real quick, and you can see if we go into our call out that we do have a one-to-one match between these invocable variables here and actually what shows up inside of the flow. So we need to fill all these in. You can see they're all required. So we're going to go over into our record. We'll go into order summary, the bill to contact, and then we're going to get the email. And we're going to do this for every single one of these, but with a different piece of information for each one. So we need the first name in this one. This journey API event key we don't have right now. Now this isn't something that lives inside of Salesforce. This is what lives inside of Journey Builder. So we're actually going to just stub that out real quick, but we'll move on and we'll actually come back and fill that in at a later time here. So let's grab the last name now. And then we'll grab the order summary ID. And then we want to grab the subscriber key, which could be anything, but in a lot of best practices when it comes to Marketing Cloud, you likely do want that to be the contact ID. So we will grab that ID from the bill to contact here, and that will be our subscriber key. However, in your instance, if you're using email address as a subscriber key, you could pull the email address in here, or you could, pull the GUID that you created or whatever you plan on using as a subscriber key. You can pass that value in here. But once we've done that, we can click done, and we'll save this again real quick so we don't lose our information. And then we have our fire event in journey inside of this flow. So now if we just take a deep breath and we kind of say, what did we just do? Well, in this kind of section of the video here, what we've done is we've gone and created our flow, and we've actually created our invocable, which will allow us to actually pass the information from the flow over into Marketing Cloud. And the Marketing Cloud, we're assuming, does something at this point, which we haven't configured yet. At this point, we'll save this and we'll leave it, and we'll actually come back after we've done the Marketing Cloud piece, and we'll connect the dots from there. Now, I did think it would be helpful if I showed one more variation of how we could do this, and also a good way to debug if you're curious. Now, what I've done here is I've basically replicated what we did on the other flow. This is called the order confirmation email screen flow. And the idea behind this is that when you're testing this and kind of setting up your instance, you might want a way to easily trigger an email to go out from an order multiple times just to get the payload right, possibly, or kind of to tweak what you're trying to build. So you can do that pretty simply by creating a screen flow, embedding the same Apex action here. And kind of one of the keys here is that you do need to create a variable called record ID. And what we'll do at the very beginning of this is we're going to get the ID based on the order summary, and that will allow us to pass the ID along, get the order summary, and embed that into our actual screen. So if we go back over into our order summary, we can see that we have a fire journey event. And that fire journey event really does nothing right now other than pass all the information over to the invocable. So it's a handy way to kind of test this. And really all this is a button inside of the order summary object called fire journey event, configured to pass it over into a specific flow that we just created. So that might be a handy trick if you're trying to test this out in your own instance and you don't want to have to go through a complete order every single time. All right, and that has been part 1 of our order confirmation email with Marketing Cloud. Now we will do a part 2 here relatively soon, which will actually show you the Marketing Cloud side of this, and it will allow us to connect the two of them together here. But hopefully that was a pretty in-depth overview of how to configure all this inside of Commerce Cloud, and really showed you, the nuances of how to create this invocable and the flow that would orchestrate this. So with that, rate and like the video if you liked it. I would love to hear in your comments if you guys have any other thoughts for videos. Thanks, everyone.